Aesop's Fables, Chapter 1, The Frogs and the Ox. An ox came down to a reedy pool to drink. As he splashed heavily into the water, he crushed a young frog into the mud. The old frog soon missed the little one and asked his brothers and sisters what had become of him. "A great big monster," said one of them, "stepped on little brother with one of his huge feet."
"Big, was he?" said the old frog, puffing herself up. "Was he as big as this?"
"Oh, much bigger," they cried. The frog puffed up still more.
"He could not have been as bigger than this," she said.
But the little frogs all declared that the monster was much, much bigger, and the old frog kept puffing herself out more and more until all at once she burst. Do not attempt the impossible. Chapter 2. Belling the Cat. The mice once called a meeting to decide on a plan to free themselves of their enemy, the cat. At least they wished to find some way of knowing when she was coming so they might have time to run away. Indeed, something had to be done, for they lived in such constant fear of her claws that they hardly dared stir from their dens by night or day. Many plans were discussed, but none of them was thought good enough. At last a very young mouse got up and said, "I have a plan that seems very simple, but I know it will be successful. All we have to do is hang a bell about the cat's neck. When we hear the bell ringing, we will know immediately that our enemy is coming." All the mice were much surprised that they had not thought of such a plan before, but in the midst of rejoicing over their good fortune, an old mouse arose and said, "I will say that the plan of the young mouse is very good, but let me ask one question. Who will bell the cat?" It is one thing to say that something should be done, but quite a different matter to do it. Chapter 3. The Town Mouse and the Country Mouse. A town mouse once visited a relative who lived in the country. For lunch, the country mouse served wheat stalks, roots, and acorns, with a dash of cold water for drink. The town mouse ate very sparingly, nibbling a little of this and a little of that, and by her manner making it very plain that she ate the simple food only to be polite. After the meal, the friends had a long talk, or rather the town mouse talked about her life in the city while the country mouse listened. They then went to bed in a cozy nest in the hedgerow and slept in quiet and comfort until morning. In her sleep, the country mouse dreamed she was a town mouse with all the luxuries and delights of city life that her friend had described for her. So the next day, when the town mouse asked the country mouse to go home with her to the city, she gladly said yes. When they reached the mansion in which the town mouse lived, they found on the table in the dining room the leavings of a very fine banquet. There were sweetmeats and jellies, pastries, delicious cheeses, indeed, the most tempting foods that a mouse can imagine. But just as the country mouse was about to nibble a dainty bit of a pastry, she heard a cat meow loudly and scratch at the door. In great fear, the mice scurried to a hiding place, where they lay quite still for a long time, hardly daring to breathe. When at last they ventured back to the feast, the door opened suddenly, and in came the servants to clear the table, followed by the house dog. The country mouse stopped in the town mouse den, only long enough to pick up her carpet bag and umbrella. "You may have luxuries and dainties that I have not," she said as she hurried away, "but I prefer my plain food and simple life in the country with the peace and security that go with it." Poverty with security is better than plenty in the midst of fear and uncertainty. Chapter 4. The Fox and the Grapes. A fox one day spied a beautiful bunch of ripe grapes hanging from a vine, trained along the branches of a tree. The grapes seemed ready to burst with juice, and the fox's mouth watered as he gazed longingly at them. The bunch hung from a high branch, and the fox had to jump for it. The first time he jumped, he missed it by a long way, so he walked off a short distance and took a running leap at it, only to fall short once more. Again and again he tried, but in vain. Now he sat down and looked at the grapes in disgust. "What a fool I am," he said. "Here I am, wearing myself out to get a bunch of sour grapes that are not worth gaping for." And off he walked, very scornfully. There are many who pretend to despise and belittle that which is beyond their reach. Chapter 5. The Wolf and the Crane. A wolf had been feasting too greedily, and a bone had stuck crosswise in his throat. He could get it neither up nor down, and of course he could not eat a thing. Naturally, that was an awful state of affairs for a greedy wolf. So away he hurried to the crane. He was sure that she, with her long neck and bill, would easily be able to reach the bone and pull it out. "I will reward you very handsomely," said the wolf, "if you pull that bone out for me." The crane, as you can imagine, was very uneasy about putting her head in a wolf's throat. But she was so grasping in nature, so she did what the wolf asked her to do. When the wolf felt that the bone was gone, he started to walk away. "But what about my reward?" called the crane anxiously. "What?" snarled the wolf, whirling around. "Haven't you got it? Isn't it enough that I let you take your head out of my mouth without snapping it off?" Expect no reward for serving the wicked. Chapter 6. The Lion and the Mouse. A lion lay asleep in the forest, his great head resting on his paws. A timid little mouse came upon him unexpectedly, and in her fright and haste to get away, ran across the lion's nose. Roused from his nap, the lion laid his huge paw angrily on the tiny creature to kill her. "Spare me," begged the poor mouse. "Please let me go, and someday I will surely repay you." The lion was much amused to think that a mouse could ever help him, but he was generous and finally let the mouse go. Some days later, while stalking his prey in the forest, the lion was caught in the toils of a hunter's net. Unable to free himself, he filled the forest with his angry roaring. The mouse knew the voice and quickly found the lion struggling in the net. Running to one of the great ropes that bound him, she gnawed it until it parted, and soon the lion was free. "You laughed when I said I would repay you," said the mouse. "Now you see that even a mouse can help a lion." A kindness is never wasted. Chapter 7. The Gnat and the Bull. A gnat flew over the meadow with much buzzing, for so small a creature, and settled on the tip of one of the horns of a bull. After he had rested a short time, he made ready to fly away. But before he left, he begged the bull's pardon for having used his horn for a resting place. "You must be very glad to have me go now," he said. "It's all the same to me," replied the bull. "I did not even know you were there." We are often of greater importance in our own eyes than in the eyes of our neighbor. The smaller the mind, the greater the conceit. Chapter 8. The Plane Tree. Two travelers, walking in the noonday sun, sought the shade of a wide-spreading tree to rest. As they lay looking up among the pleasant leaves, they saw that it was a plane tree. "How useless is the plain," said one of them. "It bears no fruit whatsoever, and only serves to litter the ground with leaves."
"Ungrateful creatures," said a voice from the plane tree. "You lie here in my cooling shade, and yet you say I am useless. Thus ungratefully, O Jupiter, do men receive their blessings."
Our best blessings are often the least appreciated. Chapter 9. The Owl and the Grasshopper. The owl always takes her sleep during the day. Then after sundown, when the rosy light fades from the sky and the shadows rise slowly through the wood, out she comes, ruffling and blinking from the old hollow tree. Now her weird "hoo, hoo, hoo" echoes through the quiet wood, and she begins her hunt for little bugs and beetles, frogs, mice, she likes to eat so well. Now there was a certain old owl who had become very cross and hard to please as she grew older, especially if anything disturbed her daily slumbers. One warm summer afternoon, as she dozed away in her den in the old oak tree, a grasshopper nearby began a joyous but very raspy song. Out popped the old owl's head from the opening in the tree that served her both for door and for window. "Get away from here, sir," she said to the grasshopper. "Have you no manners? You should at least respect my age and leave me to sleep in quiet." But the grasshopper answered saucily that he had as much right to his place in the sun as the owl had to her place in the old oak. Then he struck up a louder and still more rasping tune. The wise old owl knew quite well that it would do no good to argue with the grasshopper, nor with anybody else for that matter. Besides, her eyes were not sharp enough by day to permit her to punish the grasshopper as he deserved. So she laid aside all hard words and spoke very kindly to him. "Well, sir," she said, "if I must stay awake, I'm going to settle right down to enjoy your singing. Now that I think of it, I have a wonderful wine here sent me from Olympus, of which I am told Apollo drinks before he sings to the high gods. Please come up and taste this delicious drink with me. I know it will make you sing like Apollo himself." The foolish grasshopper was taken up by the owl's flattering words. Up he jumped to the owl's den, but as soon as he was near enough, so the old owl could see him clearly, she pounced upon him and ate him up. Flattery is not a proof of true admiration. Do not let flattery throw you off your guard against an enemy. Chapter 10. The Oak and the Reeds. A giant oak tree stood near a brook, in which grew some slender reeds. When the wind blew, the great oak stood proudly upright, with its 100 arms uplifted to the sky. But the reeds bowed low in the wind and sang a sad and mournful song.
"You have reason to complain," said the oak. "The slightest breeze that ruffles the surface of the water makes you bow your heads, while I, the mighty oak, stand upright and firm before the howling winds."
"Do not worry about us," replied the reeds. "The winds do not harm us. We bow before them, and so we do not break. You, in all your pride and strength, have so far resisted their blows, but the end is coming." As the reeds spoke, a great hurricane rushed out of the north. The oak stood proudly and fought against the storm, while the yielding reeds bowed low. The wind redoubled in fury, and all at once the great tree fell, torn up by the roots, and lay among the pitying reeds. Better to yield when it is fully to resist than to resist stubbornly and be destroyed. Chapter 11. The Crow and the Pitcher. In a spell of dry weather, when the birds could find very little to drink, a thirsty crow found a pitcher with a little water in it. But the pitcher was high and had a narrow neck, and no matter how he tried, the crow could not reach the water. The poor thing felt as if he must die of thirst. Then an idea came to him. Picking up some small pebbles, he dropped them into the pitcher one by one. With each pebble, the water rose a little higher until at last it was near enough so he could drink. In a pinch, a good use of our wits may help us out. Chapter 12. The Two Goats. Two goats, frisking gaily on the rocky steeps of a mountain valley, chanced to meet, one on each side of a deep valley through which poured a high mountain torrent. The trunk of a fallen tree formed the only means for crossing the valley, and on this not even two squirrels could have passed each other in safety. The narrow path would have made the bravest tremble. Not so our goats. Their pride would not permit either to stand aside for the other. One set her foot on the log, the other did likewise. In the middle they met horn to horn on this very thin log. Neither would give way, and so they both fell, to be swept away by the roaring torrent below. It is better to yield than to come to misfortune through stubbornness. Chapter 13. The Wild Boar and the Fox. A wild boar was sharpening his tusks busily against the stump of a tree when a fox happened to pass by. Now the fox was always looking for a chance to make fun of his neighbors, so he made a great show of looking anxiously about, as if in fear of some hidden enemy. But the boar kept right on with his work. "Why are you doing that?" asked the fox at last with a grin. "There isn't any danger that I can see."
"True enough," replied the boar. "But when danger does come, there will not be a time for such work as this. My weapons will have to be ready for use then, or I shall suffer from it."
Preparedness for war is the best guarantee of peace. Chapter 14. The Heron. A heron was walking steadily along the bank of a stream, his eyes on the clear water and his long neck and pointed bill ready to snap up a likely morsel for his breakfast. A heron is a type of bird with a long neck. The clear water swarmed with fish, but Master Heron was hard to please that morning. "No small fry for me," he said. "Such a scanty fare is not fit for a heron." Now a fine young perch swam near, which is a type of fish. "No, indeed," said the heron. "I wouldn't even trouble to open my beak for anything like that." As the sun rose, the fish left the shallow water near the shore and swam below into the cool depths toward the middle. The heron saw no more fish, and very glad was he at last to breakfast on a tiny snail. Do not be too hard to suit, or you may have to be content with the worst or nothing at all. Chapter 15. The Fox and the Stork. The fox one day thought of a plan to amuse himself at the expense of the stork, at whose odd appearance he was always laughing. "You must come today and dine with me," he said to the stork, smiling to himself at the trick he was going to play. The stork gladly accepted the invitation and arrived in good time and with a very good appetite. For dinner, the fox served soup, but it was set in a very shallow dish, and all the stork could do was to wet the very tip of his bill. Not a drop of soup could he get. But the fox lapped it up easily, and to increase the disappointment of the stork, made a great show of enjoyment. The hungry stork was much displeased at the trick, but he was calm, even-tempered, fellow, and saw no good in flying into a rage. Instead, not long afterwards, he invited the fox to dine with him, in turn. The fox arrived promptly at the time that had been set, and the stork served a fish dinner that had a very appetizing smell. But it was served in a tall jar with a very narrow neck. The stork could easily get at the food with his long bill, but all the fox could do was lick the outside of the jar and sniff at the delicious odor. And when the fox lost his temper, the stork said calmly, "Do not play tricks on your neighbors unless you can stand the same treatment yourself." Chapter 16. The Stag and His Reflection. The stag is a kind of moose. A stag, drinking from a crystal spring, saw himself mirrored in the clear water. He greatly admired the graceful arc of his antlers, but he was very much ashamed of his spindling legs. "How can it be," he sighed, "that I could be cursed with such legs when I have so magnificent a crown?" At that moment he scented a panther, and in an instant was bounding away through the forest. But as he ran, his wide-spreading antlers caught in the branches of the trees, and soon the panther overtook him. Then the stag perceived that the legs of which he was so ashamed would have saved him had it not been for the useless ornaments on his head. We often make much of the ornamental and despise the useful. Chapter 17. The Cock and the Fox. One bright evening, as the sun was sinking on a glorious world, a wise old cock flew into a tree to roost. Before he composed himself to rest, he flapped his wings 3 times and cawed loudly. But just as he was about to put his head under his wing, his beady eyes caught a flash of red and a glimpse of a long pointed nose. And there, just below him, stood Master Fox. "Have you heard the wonderful news?" cried the fox in a very joyful and excited manner. "What news?" asked the cock very calmly. But he had a queer fluttering feeling inside of him, for you know he was very much afraid of the fox. "Your family and mine and all other animals have agreed to forget their differences and live in peace and friendship from now on forever. Just think of it. I simply cannot wait to embrace you. Do come down, dear friend, and let us celebrate the joyful event." "How grand!" said the cock. "I certainly am delighted at the news." But he spoke in an absent way, and stretching up on tiptoes, seemed to be looking at something afar off. "What is it you see?" asked the fox a little anxiously. "Why, it looks to me like a couple of dogs coming this way. They must have heard the good news and—" But the fox did not wait to hear more. Off he started on a run. "Wait!" cried the cock. "Why do you run? The dogs are friends of yours now." "Yes," answered the fox, "but they might not have heard the news. Besides, I have a very important errand that I had almost forgotten about." The cock smiled as he buried his head in his feathers and went to sleep, for he had succeeded in outwitting a very crafty enemy. The trickster is easily tricked. Chapter 18. The Fox and the Goat. A fox fell into a well, and though it was not very deep, he found that he could not get out again. After he had been in the well a long time, a thirsty goat came by. The goat thought the fox had gone down to drink, and so he asked if the water was good. "The finest in the whole country," said the crafty fox. "Jump in and try it. There's more than enough for the both of us." The thirsty goat immediately jumped in and began to drink. The fox just as quickly jumped on the goat's back and leaped from the tip of the goat's horns out of the well. The foolish goat now saw what a plight he had gone into, and begged the fox to help him out, but the fox was already on his way out of the woods. "If you had as much sense as you had beard, old fellow," he said as he ran, "you would have been more cautious about finding a way to get out again before you jumped in." Look before you leap. Chapter 19. The Fox and the Leopard. A fox and a leopard, resting hazily after a generous dinner, amused themselves by disputing about their good looks. The leopard was very proud of his glossy, spotted coat and made disdainful remarks about the fox, whose appearance he declared was quite ordinary. The fox prided himself on his fine bushy tail with its tips of white, but he was wise enough to see that he could not rival the leopard in looks. Still, he kept up a flow of sarcastic talk just to exercise his wits and to have the fun of disputing. The leopard was about to lose his temper when the fox got up, yawning lazily. "You may have a very smart coat," he said, "but you would be a great deal better off if you had a little more smartness inside your head and less on your ribs the way I am. That's what I call real beauty." A fine coat is not always an indication of an attractive mind. Chapter 20. The Frog and the Mouse. A young mouse in search of adventure was running along the bank of a pond where lived a frog. When the frog saw the mouse, he swam to the bank and croaked, "Won't you pay me a visit? I can promise you a good time if you do." The mouse did not need much coaxing, for he was very anxious to see the world and everything in it. But though he could swim a little, he did not dare risk going into the pond without some help. The frog had a plan. He tied the mouse's leg to his own with a tough reed. Then into the pond he jumped, dragging his foolish companion with him. The mouse soon had enough of it and wanted to return to shore, but the treacherous frog had other plans. He pulled the mouse down under the water and drowned him. But before he could untie the reed that bound him to the dead mouse, a hawk came sailing over the pond. Seeing the body of the mouse floating on the water, the hawk swooped down, seized the mouse, and carried it off, with the frog dangling from its leg. Thus at one swoop he had caught both meat and fish for his dinner. Wow, that's crazy. Those who seek to harm others often come to harm themselves through their own deceit. Chapter 21. The Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. I love this story. A certain wolf could not get enough to eat because of the watchfulness of the shepherds, but one night he found a sheepskin that had been cast aside and forgotten. The next day, dressed in the skin, the wolf strolled into the pasture with the sheep. Soon a little lamb was following him about and was quickly led away to slaughter. That evening the wolf entered the fold with the flock. But it happened that the shepherd took a fancy for mutton broth that very evening, and picking up a knife, went to the fold. There, the first he laid hands on and killed was the wolf. The evildoer often comes to harm through his own deceit. I never heard that version of the story. Chapter 21. The Eagle and the Beetle. A beetle once begged the eagle to spare a hare which had run to her for protection, but the eagle pounced upon her prey, the sweep of her great wings tumbling the beetle a dozen feet away. Furious at the disrespect shown her, the beetle flew to the eagle's nest and rolled out the eggs. Not one did she spare. Oh my God. The eagle's grief and anger knew no bounds, but who had done the cruel deed she did not know. Next year, the eagle built her nest far up on a mountain crag, but the beetle found it and again destroyed the eggs.
my God, that's so mean. In despair, the eagle now implored great Jupiter to let her place her eggs in his lap. There, none would dare harm them. But the beetle buzzed about Jupiter's head and made him rise to drive her away. And the eggs rolled from his lap. Now the beetle told the reason for her action, and Jupiter had to acknowledge the justice of her cause. And they say that even after, while the eagle's eggs lie in the nest in spring, the beetle still sleeps in the ground, for so Jupiter commanded. Even the weakest may find means to avenge a wrong. Wow. Chapter 22. The Mother and the Wolf. Early one morning, a hungry wolf was prowling around a cottage at the edge of a village when he heard a child crying in the house. Then he heard the mother's voice say, "Hush, child, hush! Stop crying, or I will give you to the wolf." Surprised but delighted at the prospect of so delicious a meal, the wolf settled down under an open window, expecting every moment to have the child handed out to him. But though the little one continued to fret, the wolf waited all day in vain. Then, toward nightfall, he heard the mother's voice again, as she sat down near the window to sing and rock her baby to sleep. "There, child, there! The wolf shall not get you, no, no! Daddy is watching, and Daddy will kill him if he should come near." Just then the father came within sight of the home, and the wolf was barely able to save himself from the dogs by a clever bit of running. Do not believe everything you hear. Chapter 24. The Hare and the Tortoise. A hare was making fun of the tortoise one day for being so slow. "Do you ever get anywhere?" he asked with a mocking laugh. "Yes," replied the tortoise, "and I get there sooner than you think. I'll run you a race and prove it." The hare was much amused at the idea of running a race with the tortoise, but for the fun of the thing, he agreed. So the fox, who had consented to act as judge, marked the distance and started the runners off. The hare was soon far out of sight, and to make the tortoise feel very deeply how ridiculous it was for him to try a race with a hare, he lay down beside the course to take a nap until the tortoise should catch up. The tortoise, meanwhile, kept going slowly but steadily, and after a time passed the place where the hare was sleeping, but the hare slept on very peacefully, and when at last he did not wake up, the tortoise was near the goal. The hare now ran his swiftest, but he could not overtake the tortoise in time. The race is not always to the swift. Chapter 25. The Dog and His Reflection. A dog to whom the butcher had thrown a bone was hurrying home with his prize as fast as he could. As he crossed a narrow footbridge, he happened to look down and saw himself reflected in the quiet water as if in a mirror. But the greedy dog thought he saw a real dog carrying a bone much bigger than his own. If he had stopped to think, he would have known better. But instead of thinking, he dropped his bone and sprang at the dog in the river, only to find himself swimming for dear life to reach the shore. At last he managed to scramble out, and as he stood sadly thinking about the good bone he had lost, he realized what a stupid dog he had been. It is very foolish to be greedy. Chapter 26. The Fox and the Crow. A classic. One bright morning, as the fox was following his sharp nose through the wood in search of a bite to eat, he saw a crow on the limb of a tree overhead. This was by no means the first crow the fox had ever seen. What caught his attention this time and made him stop for a second look was that the lucky crow held a bit of cheese in her beak. "No need to search any farther," thought sly Master Fox. "Here is a dainty bite for my breakfast.
Up he trotted to the foot of the tree in which the crow was sitting, and looking up admiringly, he cried, "Good morning, beautiful creature." The crow, her head cocked on one side, watched the fox suspiciously, but she kept her beak tightly closed on the cheese and did not return his greeting. "What a charming creature she is," said the fox. "How her feathers shine! What a beautiful form, and what splendid wings! Such a wonderful bird should have a very lovely voice, since everything else about her is so perfect. Could she sing just one song? I know I should hail her Queen of Birds." Listening to those flattering words, the crow forgot all her suspicion, and also her breakfast. She wanted very much to be called Queen of Birds, so she opened her beak wide to utter her loudest call, and down fell the cheese straight into the fox's open mouth. "Thank you," said Master Fox sweetly as he walked off. "Though it is cracked, you have a voice, sure enough, but where are your wits?" The flatterer lives at the expense of those who will listen to him. Chapter 27. The Ant and the Dove. A dove saw an ant fall into a brook. The ant struggled in vain to reach the bank, and in pity the dove dropped a blade of straw close beside it. Clinging to the straw like a shipwrecked sailor to a broken spar, the ant floated safely to shore. Soon after, the ant saw a man getting ready to kill the dove with a stone, but just as he cast the stone, the ant stung him in the heel so that the pain made him miss his aim, and the startled dove flew to safety in a distant wood. A kindness is never wasted. Chapter 28. The Man and the Satyr. A satyr is a creature that looks like a boy, but has the legs of a horse, and it has horns. A long time ago, a man met a satyr in the forest and succeeded in making friends with him. The two soon became the best of comrades, living together in the man's hut. But one cold winter evening, as they were walking homeward, the satyr saw the man blow on his fingers. "Why do you do that?" asked the satyr. "To warm my hands," the man replied. When they reached home, the man prepared 2 bowls of porridge. These he placed steaming hot on the table, and the comrades sat down very cheerfully to enjoy the meal. But much to the satyr's surprise, the man began to blow into his bowl of porridge. "Why do you do that?" he asked. "To cool my porridge," replied the man. The satyr sprang hurriedly to his feet and made for the door. "Goodbye," he said. "I've seen enough. A fellow that blows hot and cold in the same breath cannot be friends with me." The man who talks for both sides is not to be trusted by either. Okay, this lesson was kind of dumb, because the satyr just had a bit of a misunderstanding about how hot and cold works, but anyways, Chapter 29. The Hare and His Ears. The lion had been badly hurt by the horns of a goat, which he was eating. He was very angry to think that any animal that he chose for a meal should be so brazen as to wear such dangerous things as horns to scratch him while he ate. So he commanded that all animals with horns should leave his domain within 24 hours. The command struck terror among the beasts. All those who were so unfortunate as to have horns began to pack up and move out. Even the hare, who, as you know, has no horns, and so had nothing to fear, passed a very restless night, dreaming awful dreams about the fearful lion. And when he came out of the warren in the early morning sunshine, and there saw the shadow cast by his long and pointed ears, a terrible fright seized him. "Goodbye, neighbor Cricket," he called. "I'm off. He will certainly make out that my ears are horns, no matter what I say." Do not give your enemies the slightest reason to attack your reputation. Your enemies will seize any excuse to attack you. Chapter 30. The Fisherman and the Little Fish. A poor fisherman who lived on fish that he caught had bad luck one day and caught nothing but a very small fish. The fisherman was about to put it in his basket when the little fish said, "Please spare me, Mr. Fisherman. I am so small, it is not worth while to carry me home. When I am bigger, I shall make you a much better meal." But the fisherman quickly put the fish into his basket. "How foolish I should be," he said, "to throw you back. However small you might be, you are better than nothing at all." A small gain is worth more than a large promise. Not always. Chapter 31. The Wolf and the Kid. There was once a little kid whose growing horns made him think he was a grown-up. Billy Goat is what his name was. So one evening, when the flock started home from the pasture and his mother called, the kid paid no heed and kept right on nibbling the tender grass. A little later, when he lifted his head, the flock was gone. He was all alone. The sun was sinking. Long shadows came creeping over the ground. A chilly little wind came creeping with him and making scary noises in the grass. The kid shivered as he thought of the terrible wolf. Then he started wildly over the field, bleating for his mother. But not halfway near a clump of trees, there was the wolf. The kid knew there was little hope for him. "Please, Mr. Wolf," he said, trembling, "I know you are going to eat me, but first please pipe me a tune, for I want to dance and be merry as long as I can." The wolf liked the idea of a little music before eating, so he struck up a merry tune, and the kid leaped and frisked gaily. Meanwhile, the flock was moving slowly homeward. In the still evening air, the wolf's piping carried far. The shepherd's dog pricked up their ears. They recognized the song the wolf sings before a feast, and in a moment they were racing back to the pasture. The wolf's song ended suddenly, and as he ran with the dogs at his heels, he called himself a fool for turning piper to please a kid, when he should have stuck to his butcher's trade. Do not let anything turn you from your purpose. Chapter 31. The Tortoise and the Ducks. The tortoise, you know, carries his house on his back. No matter how hard he tries, he cannot leave home. They say that Jupiter punished him so because he was such a lazy stay-at-home that he would not go to Jupiter's wedding even when especially invited. After many years, Tortoise began to wish he had gone to that wedding. When he saw how gaily the birds flew about, and how the hare and the chipmunk and all the other animals ran nimbly by him, always eager to see everything there was to be seen, the tortoise felt very sad and discontented. He wanted to see the world too, and there he was with a house on his back, and little short legs that could hardly drag him along. One day he met a pair of ducks and told them about all his troubles. "We can help you see the world," said the ducks. "Take hold of this stick with your teeth, and we will carry you far up in the air where you can see the whole countryside, but keep quiet or you will be sorry." The tortoise was very glad indeed. He seized the stick firmly with his teeth. The two ducks stood hold of it, one at each end, and away they sailed up towards the clouds. Just then a crow flew by. He was very much astonished at the strange sight and cried, "This must surely be the king of tortoises." "Why, certainly," began the tortoise, but as he opened his mouth to say these foolish words, he lost his hold on the stick, and down he fell to the ground, where he was dashed to pieces on a rock. Foolish curiosity and vanity often lead to misfortune. Chapter 33. The Young Crab and His Mother. "Why in the world do you walk sideways like that?" said a mother crab to her son. "You should always walk straight forward with your toes turned out."
"Show me how to walk, mother dear," answered the little crab obediently. "I want to learn."
So the old crab tried and tried to walk straight forward, but she could walk sideways only like her son. And when she wanted to turn her toes out, she tripped and fell on her nose.
Do not tell others how to act unless you can set a good example.
Chapter 34. The Dog, the Cock, and the Fox. A dog and a cock, who were the best of friends, wished very much to see something of the world. So they decided to leave the farmyard and to set out into the world along the road that led to the woods. The two comrades traveled along in the very best of spirits and without meeting any adventure to speak of. At nightfall, the cock, looking for a place to roost, as was his custom, spied nearby a hollow tree that he thought would do very nicely for a night's lodging. The dog could creep inside, and the cock would fly up on one of the branches. So said, so done, and both slept very comfortably. With the first glimmer of dawn, the cock awoke. For the moment he forgot just where he was. He thought he was still in the farmyard, where it had been his duty to arouse the household at daybreak. So standing on tiptoes, he flapped his wings and crowed lustily. But instead of awakening the farmer, he awakened a fox not far off in the wood. The fox immediately had rosy visions of a very delicious breakfast. Hurrying to the tree where the cock was roosting, he said very politely, "A hearty welcome to our woods, honoured sir. I cannot tell you how glad I am to see you here. I am quite sure we shall become the closest of friends."
"I feel highly flattered, kind sir," replied the cock slyly. "If you will please go around to the door of my house at the front of the tree, my porter will let you in." The hungry but unsuspecting fox went around the tree as he was told, and in a twinkling the dog had seized him.
Those who try to deceive may expect to be paid in their own coin. Chapter 35. The Eagle and the Jackdaw. An eagle, swooping down on powerful wings, seized a lamb in her talons and made off with it into her nest. A jackdaw saw the deed, and his silly head was filled with the idea that he was big and strong enough to do as the eagle had done. The jackdaw is kind of like a type of bird. So with much rustling of feathers, had a fierce air, he came down swiftly on the back of a large ram. But when he tried to rise again, he found that he could not get away, for his claws were tangled in the wool. And so far was he from carrying away with the ram, that the ram hardly noticed he was there. The shepherd saw the fluttering jackdaw and at once guessed what had happened. Running up, he caught the bird and clipped its wings. That evening he gave the jackdaw to his children. "What a funny bird this is," they said, laughing. "What do you call it, father?"
"That is a jackdaw, my children, but if you should ask him, he would say he is an eagle."
Do not let your vanity make you overestimate your powers. Chapter 36. The Boy and the Filberts. A boy was given permission to put his hand into a pitcher to get some filberts, but he took such a great fistful that he could not draw his hand out again. There he stood, unwilling to give up a single filbert, and yet unable to get them all out at once. Vexed and disappointed, he began to cry.
"My boy," said his mother, "be satisfied with half the nuts you have taken, and you will easily get your hand out. Then, perhaps, you may have some more filberts some other time."
Do not attempt too much at once. Chapter 37. Hercules and the Wagoner. A farmer was driving his wagon along a miry country road after a heavy rain. The horses could hardly drag the load through the deep mud, and at last came to a standstill when one of the wheels sank to the hub in a rut. The farmer climbed down from his seat and stood beside the wagon, looking at it but without making the least effort to get it out of the rut. All he did was to curse his bad luck and call loudly on Hercules to come to his aid. Then, it is said, Hercules really did appear, saying, "Put your shoulder to the wheel, man, and urge on your horses. Do you think you can move the wagon simply by looking at it and whining about it? Hercules will not help unless you make some effort to help yourself." And when the farmer put his shoulder to the wheel and urged on the horses, the wagon moved very readily. And soon the farmer was riding along in great content and with a good lesson learned. Self-help is the best help. Heaven helps those who help themselves. That's funny. Okay, that's the end of part 1 of Aesop's Fables. Thanks for tuning in.